I do know in which situation we are, right? Enjoy your pakoras, enjoy your tea, and this is going to be sort of a low-key kind of presentation. I'm going to be as entertaining as possible. So sit, relax, and if there are bigger messages, I'll shout louder. Okay? Is that the deal? Okay.
I request all the participants kindly mute your mobile, please.
Okay. Very quickly, as you read on the program, so it's an INQUA-funded database project which is exclusively about the Global South. So I'm going to unpack every word of it, but here I said it for the sake of, the titling it. It's a multidisciplinary Global South value database, and the database name is PCSNIT, and how and what it is we can talk in a second. I'm talking here, but of course I am, supported by and lifted by so many people. My project coordinators, so their names are right up there, they're sitting in various parts of the world that you will see, and that's the beauty of this project. First of all, I would like to thank INQUA for supporting the project, that is one. We'll talk very briefly about INQUA in a second, but I also like to thank Madhulika, NMMA, ASI, Nishant, so all our friends and colleagues at ASI who have taken up this monumental task, and you all for attending it and making it a great success, because I think what we need is basically getting resource people from the region themselves. So idea for this database is actually building a community that community can contribute to the respective parts of the Global South. What it is, once again we can speak. This one. Okay, so I'll have to tell you. Okay, no worries. So quick word about my journey and why I'm going to share it. I'm going to tell you in a second. So with the degrees in geology and archaeology, I went ahead and I said I want to club what geology, archaeology has taught me. With that, I started studying landscape in the long-term context, their human context, their climatic context. And after all, I realized that all these context has to be further contextualized. Further contextualized in the sense that we can make use of it. So that art is called as the paleoecology, that paleoecology or the past ecology can sort of become a helper, an aider for policy engagement, for policy information. So paleoecology for ecological management, that is where I went. So I have been a globetrotter and I have come back home, right, with all these things gathered, with the interest of exploring long-term climate, environment, people interactions and their translation into policy objective. Why I wanted to show this slide just as my story, because that is one human which is telling you one story. So imagine the wealth of archaeology which is telling us thousands and millions of stories with each object and artifact. So that is where the beauty of archaeology lies, and that is where we are trying to build with the help of the database. Please. Now, quick word about INQUA. What is INQUA? I think some of you have heard this name, some of you might not have. So INQUA is the International Union for Quaternary Research, which actually focuses on long-term people, climate, and ecology or environment interactions. So idea for promoting quaternary sciences is at the center of INQUA. And this project, as I said, this is like a thank you note towards the funders. That is one thing. And second thing is information. Can we click it again? One thing I want your attention to draw is commission. So INQUA basically works through the commission, so different thematic areas. So there are multiple areas if you're working on coastal or if you're working on humans and biosphere interaction, that is who funded us this particular project. So Palcom and other things. So I really encourage you to go to INQUA website, try to explore. It's such a treasure trove. It has lots and lots of information. If you even end up going to that website, you might get lost because there is lots and lots of information. We are trying to make it even better and better. So with that, I would like to introduce you to the actual project. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, you have your paper, okay? So what is PCSync? So PCSync is nothing but, as I said, it's a database where we are trying to understand, can the whole be not just the sum but something beyond that. So the whole is not the sum of parts. So can we build a synthesis of the past human and environmental system for one geographical region or one geographical entity we'll talk about in a second, and can we learn from it? So what has what has PCSync become is an example of scientific community mobilization and collaboration which hasn't happened in certain parts of the world. So I'm talking about one specific entity, and as I keep saying, it's called as the Global South, which is a number of countries basically situated in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in Africa, Asia, and parts of Oceania. So many parts of the Pacific as well, those islands, those are very, very, very underrepresented. At the moment, we are in one of the most underrepresented parts of India. We are talking about we need more and more work from Northeast. So I don't have to highlight what, So what underrepresentation means to this region and the representatives of this region. So same thing, if we want to take it to the global scale, we realize there are certain countries, those have been sort of marginalized from the long-term scientific collaborations for a particular reason. They are underrepresented in many kinds of studies, including long-term social and ecological studies. There are, although diversity of landscape, diversity of climatic zones, diversity of communities, and those communities are under a lot of pressure with the climate change and vice versa. Those ecosystems in which these communities live, they are also under the threat. There are threats toward the conservation of those communities as well as those ecosystems, those landscapes, because of many of these countries are developing economies. So we are talking about that part of the region which basically, historically speaking, has had that particular share that it couldn't sort of catch up with the world in terms of getting things together. There are multiple reasons associated with that as well. We can get into, but what we can do as a community, what we can do is we can get these things together, start putting two and two, and see whether it really makes four or if the equation needs something else. So, as I said, the motivation essentially came from looking at these scenarios, global south and global north. So that map is going to come up again and again, what I showed earlier. So if you see, this is one of the classic databases. It's called as Neotona. Do write down its name and do go to their website and try to explore. Now if you want to, you're free to do. What you see over there is, there is hell lot of data in certain regions of the world. Can you spot out certain regions where there is no or less data? Right? Very easily on the map, and it's in front of us. So that's the power of data visualization. So that is where when we start clicking, we realize that there is this barrier between certain countries, certain regions of the world, right? And if we try to, very gently draw a line, it somewhere goes there. So if we click again, what we see is, these are essentially those countries. That's why we say, or we call them the global south. Those countries essentially, not only in sciences, but there are multiple sectors. It has been struggling for a while. There is a reason, historic as I said, but then there are also futuristic implications for that. So how can we even fix those future implications? That's our concern. So through developing this multi-dimensional paleo database, when I say paleo, it's about the past systems, pieces in this particular project, it promotes the very collaborative approach for studying these systems in the first place. Trying to see what systems have been, what these systems have become, and what this system should be in the future, so that way we can at least control and manage the landscape sustainably, so we can also feed mouths, right? So we also have to have all these very intricate kind of dynamics we have. Once again, why another database? Of course, we are trying to build one for India because we do need one, but there are multiple databases in the world. They exist. So a question which came to us when we proposed this particular project to Inqua, why are you trying to reinvent the wheel? So we said, we are doing it for a reason. We are doing it because there are really immense wealth of data. Once again, each of this, take a picture of this slide, do go and try to explore these, exploit these databases. Some of them like Pangea and there's NOVA for paleoclimatology, these are called repositories. they basically store all these, they don't actually display what's there, but you can download that data, you can utilize that data. Some of them are actual databases which are thematic databases, as you can see one over here. The ArchaeoGlobe, which is exclusively archaeology related all over the world, but it basically extracted from the expert opinion as such. So it is not it's a database, but it's a qualitative database once again. So that is all there. One quantitative archaeology related database we have in the world is called as People 3000, which is a radiocarbon database. Once again, you can imagine the sampling bias. Some of these regions are represented, some of these underrepresented for sure. That is one. But then what we asked to inquire is that question. What about archaeological data sets? How many of these they actually have archaeological data sets who can interact with other data sets? So what we have at the moment mostly is the single theme databases. We don't have multi-theme databases. Multiple sites can interact with each other, but only for one theme. But what about I have some climate data and then I have some archaeological data? Can they talk to each other? They can't. So there is no provision for archaeological data sets sort of to interact with paleoclimatological or paleoecological or environmental data sets till date. So we said, you know what we are going to do? We want archaeological sites, archaeological information to go there and let it interact in whatever sense, in 10%, 20%, 30%, and we'll talk about the challenges in a bit. But we want to make sure that archaeology gets represented. And not just on one national level, but on the scale of the global south. So that was once again quite of a motivation for us in terms of actually building this. So when it comes to the objectives which I already said, so idea is to build that first ever database of published records, and we can talk about what are the issues there. We have been talking about the publications and whatnot, and try to contextualize the science of these human altered environmental regimes in the global south as a whole and also in parts. So in parts, if we try to see one particular region is doing one particular thing, can the other region is also doing that same thing? So if you can place yourself here, this is part of, we technically called it the South America or inner Central America, right? So what is happening was in Central America and South America, it does also have a connection till date. What happens in parts of Africa as well? Both of them, they have colonial histories. So each of these things, they do matter, and when we start compiling data, some of these very interesting trends come out. So we want to ask certain generic questions. What are the space-related commonalities we have? What are the time-related commonalities we may have in these regions? Right? Then on top of it, if there are connections, what are those connections? Those commonalities are really commonalities in the context of the history or not? So there are certain questions which can be, let's say, at large for the region. Some can be that specific for that specific region of global south. But eventually at the end, idea is to have this very global kind of picture and move ahead with it. So the timeline, which is very technical kind of thing, that's what I said, sit, relax. There is nothing in there in terms of what could be the takeaway. But it has been running for a while. We are in here. 2024. So we, as you can see very quickly, we are getting into the database preparation. So database is up and coming and running. But what we are trying to do in the meantime, we have utilized this time to build networks. We tried to form certain, like regions which basically need little more attention within that. And how we basically structure the database. What could be the challenges? And I'm going to discuss the challenges which also come with opportunities. So those are the things we have been doing for a while. And we recently had a 3-day hybrid workshop which happened in Spain. And of course, like those who were here, we of course, or other parts of the global south or world, I would say, they contributed from the respective, not everybody can travel at every point in time, it shouldn't. So we decided to go hybrid and try to catch more and more in terms of how we can move basically from data accumulation to actual data visualization, data compilation all together. So it can be, one side getting shown up, second side, third side, like that. So we have been doing that for a bit, preparing for that. So who are we when we say we? So of course there are multiple paleo scientists as a bigger term, which basically encompasses all of us. So there are scientists from 20 different countries. You have to be either working on or should be in Global South, that's the criteria. You can be, let's say, part of Europe, but still you are working on Global South, you are most welcome. More the merrier, it's always the case. So it's very important to basically have more and more interaction. That way we can get more and more diverse perspective into getting things done as well. So we do have people, basically so-called coordinator, who propose this project, who are sort of running it, but we want it to be sort of a self-sustaining kind of thing. So eventually it's going to become much more like that, because we do have very multidisciplinary teams. We do have people actually having expertise in more than one of these. But then you can see that it's going all the way from, people looking at environment, people looking at climate, people looking at geological aspects of it, people looking at, of course, archaeologists are there. Then biogeosciences who are looking at the ecosystem dynamics part of it, but even the past and present and future, that connection, which is where I could sit partially. And there are data scientists also on board. And who are these people who are also like simultaneously, as I said, they are expert in one of these fields and plus also explore data science in order to make sure that what we are trying to do, we do. So when it comes to the approach, as we said that, the approach is very simple in 3 words: explore, analyze and share. So what's the end point is to have this open database which everybody and anybody can use. So make it as user friendly as possible, and in order to do that, what we are going to pull in at the moment, we are trying to explore all these different existing data sets. Could be published data sets, or some of them are maybe not published but they are already there in some of the databases. If need be, we can go to them at all points. So there is also catch over there. We can talk about that in terms of challenges in few minutes, as I said, and then start analyzing them in terms of looking their spatial context, in terms of space within the Global South, what is happening, in terms of time, in what part of the time the things were happening in this particular region. Can we co-analyze that and then eventually model it in such a way that it becomes that stack. You can see that very old pictures or movies, they used to come in those very big coils and dabbas. Remember? So imagine all those dabbas one on top of each other. So it's something like that, all those dabbas, but we want some kind of thread in those dabbas. So we want to tie that dabba and we want to make sure that the dabba mixes. So we want the interdisciplinary kind of query which go through that. So what goes inside is the individual data sets, but what comes out is some of curated case studies or curated kind of database which can answer queries in a systematic way but also in an interactive and interdisciplinary way. So that interdisciplinary word is extremely important here. When we go to the approach, in order to make sure that we are touching all the different aspects of the paleo, the past, what are we looking at? We broadly said that we will have 3 different themes. One is the paleoecology or paleo-environment, if you want to call it, paleoclimatology, the past climatic trends, and the third one is archaeology. So there are multiple, we call it proxies, right? Have you heard that word before? So proxy meaning that one thing which can tell you about archaeology or tell you about paleoclimatology or paleoecology. For example, if we get a stone tool, that stone tool is a proxy for humans being in that region. So that's how we call it. So humans are not there anymore, but they have left the proxy there, and that proxy is a stone tool. Something like that. So things are actually, we started pulling in what could be the different proxies for that each of the thing. So idea, as I said, you can see all these yellow, green and purple ones, going here and there. Idea is basically make them interact with each other and see what happens. So when it comes to the advancement, as I said, it has been up and running for a while. So what we have been doing is we also have been actually started pooling in data. So far at the moment we can see that there are 64 data sets, and as I said, counting. And then data sets, they vary in time a lot. So at the moment, as you can see, the yellow ones are the single data sets. And then green ones are the clustered ones, which could have more than one data set, which is already pooled perhaps in a publication or something. So we are also trying to look at that. Maybe there are patterns in there, then we don't have to unravel it again. So all that, and then all the diamonds are basically the participants. So all the participants are basically trying to gather it together in such a way that it becomes functional. So if you go ahead, what we did apart from that is for the functional reason as well, we just decided to just group ourselves or subgroup ourselves within the global south. So if you can see the Americas part is one subgroup, then Asia and Africa, why they are together, don't ask me. For operational reasons, once again, it becomes much of a hassle otherwise, because Africa by itself is very underrepresented for multiple reasons. So that's why we just thought like Asia and Africa could do better together. And then there is this Oceania component, which also you would see is Australia. Australia is technically a developed country, so supposedly a global north country, if you ask, but it is still underrepresented in terms of scientific, databasing and scientific data sets. So why not? So we just said that you are also ours, fine. Global South is our focus, but this is what we can basically see. Australia is an island, and island ecologies are sort of underrepresented. So let's see what bigger island can tell us. So when it comes to the database, I am going to just give you a quick snapshot of the status of data sets exclusively to Asia Africa, which is the region which we live in. So we can basically reciprocate to that. So far you can see the contributions are kind of low. There are only 8 from Asia, essentially coming from India, Iran and Sri Lanka. And 3 from Africa. Africa is huge. So you can imagine, I couldn't do anything with that data. So what we basically need is the types of data set that come sinking in. I have to keep exploring again and again, and I have to make sure the database is structured in that way that it is possible. So when it comes to the themes, as I said, 3 themes: paleoclimatology, ecology and archaeology. So paleoclimatology comes in many shapes and forms. So there is dendrochronology, if you would, must have heard and have used at some point. And we yesterday at Tripura State Museum, we also saw a dendrochronological sample, right? So you must have glanced at it for sure. So there is no real consensus among this region that there is one proxy that we can just easily extract and just make it interact with other proxies. There are multiple there, which is a good news, by the way. So the consensus is not always a positive news. In this case, it is rather a positive news that not having consensus at all is a good thing. Paleoecology, mostly it is driven by something called as a fossil pollen, which some of you have definitely heard at some point in time, perhaps, or if you haven't, then I'll have a case study for you in a few minutes. And in terms of archaeology, mostly what we have is the archaeological data sets and radiocarbon data sets that will basically tell what could be, where the antiquity lies, and then we can then think about what time frame, and then we can unravel and get into the topics of interest. So if you can click again, there are different topics of interest. Once again, this is given by the community itself. So community, what we gave is couple of keywords. You just add your own interesting ideas, what you are interested in, and many people in this region, they said that, oh, we are in general interested in the climatology, and then they say what climate does. Climate does to all these systems. We are interested in extreme event for Africa. Getting drier and drier is a trend, but then there is a recurrence of extreme events. So can we look at that? Then can we look at rest of these which are very interconnected with this. So bigger is the size, as you can see in this world cloud, more people have said that they are interested in it. So that is how one of the ways we can generate a very statistical kind of visualization based on community inputs. A little snapshot of Indian subcontinent by itself. We are sitting there, we want to know. So once again, as I said that there are roughly 6 data sets in the VCSync sort of repository, but there are other databases around. So can we basically extract some of the information, whichever is needed, not necessarily all of it might be relevant. Yesterday we talked about 5 R's. So I was really mesmerized at what each of these R could do for this particular database. And then estimated time, as you can see, so far with the data sets, I am very limited and can only think about only first half of the Holocene. How long is the Holocene? 10,000. Yeah, we could roughly say that at the moment, if we say as per the current day, as of today, we know we call it a 11.7 K or 11.7 or 11,700 years. So you can see that I can only study with whatever I have is only a part of it, and I can't. I will have to stretch it a little bit backward to make sure that it makes sense. I'm not going to repeat what I have had already. So there are multiple themes there, 3 themes, and each of these basically for India and Indian subcontinent, it basically has certain proxies which stand out. So pollen is one of those, fossil pollen and charcoal is one of those which can tell us about how trees and shrubs and herbs and whatnot have been in the past. That is one of the proxies which is widely represented in this subcontinent. And also charcoal. What can charcoal tell us? Charcoal is an indication of what? How do we get charcoal? Three questions, one single answer.
Invention of fire.
Exactly, yeah. So 4-letter word fire. So fires have been, existing in this landscape, any landscape for a certain period of time. We know that from the archaeological evidences, right? We find hearths and whatnot, but we also find them along the rivers and whatnot. So that is what the paleoecologists, we technically call them, they basically try to find out. So what this region is in general interested, this is what, as I said, I am giving you a snapshot, so you can understand that this community is basically telling the project what to do. So what community is interested in? Community said that we are interested in the monsoon variability. Monsoon is very important. If it doesn't come, then it really affects badly the food production, which is a very real issue. Right? So all that is very relevant to us every day. We also count days when it doesn't rain, and we do know that even in our lifetimes things have changed. So people are interested in listening and learning about extreme events and monsoon variations in general. Also the landscape management and its application. So how landscape have changed across the time, what it has hit in terms of food production, that is one thing, and second thing is increasing fire risk. So fire risk is something which is associated with certain phenomena of climate. Can anybody quickly think? If I say increasing fire risk, what could that be? Think about it. We'll go to the next slide. Yeah. So if you can't come up with an answer, which I am sure you will, then there is once again, as I said, a quick case study again for that. So when it comes to the databases, one very important one associated with database, which Madhulika has been saying again and again highlighting, is the openness, the shareability. So what are the practices that basically goes into this particular database is technically we call it FAIR principle. So it has to be findable, it has to be accessible, it has to be interpretable, and it has to be reusable. So all of that makes that database usable at large. If we want this database to put together, whole purpose of that database is to be used. And for it to be used, there are certain parameters. So basically what we have for P-System project at large, what we have tried to find out who is who. So if I am contributing the data and then eventually I am interacting with the data, who are these different entities? So we sort of came up with we try to call it a constitution, sort of a rule book or a guidelines in general, to think about how we are sharing this, how we are collaborating this. Even before actually visualizing the database, it is very important to acknowledge who is doing what and who will be the in charge, who is going to have the ownership of that particular data, who is going to claim ownership one day if there are any conflicts happen. And that's why we have constitutions, that's why we have laws, right? So that's why we call it a P-System constitution, which is a non-negotiable policy towards DOI. Can anybody tell me what is DOI? Or what it basically does?
Data object identifier.
Fantastic, yeah. So it's a digital thing that when we start pulling things, we want to make sure that, so that is something like an accession number, isn't it? So that accession number, then it is traceable everywhere and anywhere in the world, isn't it? So that is what we discussed. So here what we have is a non-negotiable DOI policy. Any data set that is going to go into the database has to be DOI first. So what that basically makes sure is that the ownership of that data stays with the person who has produced it. And it is extremely important because along the way we have seen people actually starting to claim things which are not theirs. We are all humans, we all do that at some point in time. So So in order to basically hamper that, make sure it doesn't happen, all the data sets, those are to be DOI'd, will be DOI'd, except those data sets which are already DOI'd. So there is no point in just duplicating things. Duplication also makes databases very redundant. So it is very important to basically see that existing DOIs, if they are associated with the data sets which are basically produced as a part of a publication, that will also have its own DOI, then we'll use that DOI. So then what we will find out, or any person in here, as you can see, the person who is contributing the data and person who has produced the data, that person might be the same person, but not necessarily, right? So then each of this person gets their due credit in terms of data producer will always have DOI associated with their name, right? So data producer, data contributor, and eventually we will have people who are interacting with that database who are data explorers, right? And then of course data users. So data explorers might be the people who might only run queries and might not finish, but data users might be those people who will download that data, then they run queries, and then eventually they might come back and then they say, oh, these are newly produced data sets, just take them and fetch them and do whatever we want, I said. So that is very important in terms of actually building that mechanism as a part of any project which we did. So we decided that Zenodo is one of the communities which is open access repositories. So once again, I have put the, there's HTML right there, I have put the link. You can easily go and check out how these repositories anyway look like. So you can go to that data will have DOI, that DOI, particular that link, that will have the data is downloadable, you can use it. But then it will always be having that DOI associated with it. Very quickly, when we have this DOI, did we actually finish our responsibility to make that the ownership stays with the people? Not necessarily. So one more thing which comes with the data ownership, it has to be intact with the community. So in this case, when we say that if you are going to use the data, it is very important to get the grant, the permission of the data producer. So at the moment within the database, we are trying to produce a mechanism where the data contributor or even data producer, if that person still exists, because there are many data sets which were produced back then and that person is not in the picture, perhaps passed away or not. But then in that case, it basically goes to the data contributor making sure that you have contributed data. So that way. So basically there is really a mechanism in order for the usage of any data set. So that's why it is important to get into nuances which I am not going to get into, but they are right there. So it is important to know who you are going to cite, when you are going to cite. You are going to cite a publication associated with or a data associated or data set DOI associated with it. So it is very important to basically have a very clear cut, the instructions and guidebooks like that. So in terms of citation, as I said, who should cite what? So basically if it comes to the database, if you are doing any interaction with the database, there would be one publication eventually coming in which is actually describing how the database has set up, which Mudhushankar sir has done, which eventually NMMA would also should do if they aren't already planning. That publication then becomes a seminal publication for that database. So then that is how basically you make sure that there is this reproducibility, reusability, and the information gets circulated. So then once again there are these rule books that DOI of this versus DOI of that in this particular condition. So as we go ahead, the actual database structure and functioning, which is very technical, we might not have to go into it, which I am definitely not going to. But what is the in general structure? So as I said, I have showed you this dabba wala diagram before. So what we have is individual data sets coming in, and what is being produced is a curated database or the series of inquiries which are going to be sort of interdisciplinary in such a way. So what we need is certain database structure for it, which is going to be that certain technical thing. No need to go into that. You have had data science session already. So you do know what it entails basically. So what is one important thing in this is the not post-GRE but the SQL. SQL is something which is related to the relations. So it's a relational database that one is related to another, is third, fourth and whatnot. So there are multiple ways you could do that, and how we are doing it for PCC it's right there on the next slide. So what we do, individual data sets, of course, how to prepare? There is of course a template, right? User-friendly template, easiest to fill out. It basically goes into that, then it comes to the database structure and the curated database. We are planning to hold it. There are actually widely available applications based on R. So have you heard of R at any point in time? So R is one of the ways which is like open source interaction. Some of those who work in data science, R is their bread and butter at one point, isn't it? So then all of these things basically we make sure they speak to each other. And as I said, the advantages of having the relational database. Why do we have a relational database? One, it is ingrained in the character of PCC because we want these three things interacting with each other. It has to be a relational database. It can't be standalone in that way. But in order to do that, we have to make sure that that one thing doesn't get compromised, which is data integrity. So what is going to happen in this case is everything is get cross-checked against everything. There are errors, so those errors, we want those errors, but we also want to find those. So that's why those errors, if they are there, we make sure that they are not hidden. Then the data is of course normalized. Normalized in such a way that it is usable, or otherwise there are data sets which have had produced certain databases and who have just gone over it, what is not usable and what is usable, right? So that is one of those things. So there are a bunch of other stuff which definitely comes with it because it should be easy to extract when it comes to the complex request. So as an example, if age is this and archive is that and record is located here, all those queries should be put in together and should be able to produce something, right? So all of these is somehow stored in tables, and I have an example in the next page. So there is somehow in 6 distinct tables we do have records. So it could be a paleoecological, it could be a paleochronological, or it could be an archaeological record. So this is where I can get your input in terms of getting archaeology sort of as 1/3 of this share, 1/3 of the pillar of PCC. It is very important to know how archaeological data sets can get into that shape where they can go into databases. Or if they go into databases, what databases structures should be, sort of tweaked out in that way. So there are once again many details right there. Some of them I already spoke about, but some of them are extremely important, such as the age and age unit. As you can see, we all work in that historic sciences where the age is very important, right? How we ages is a very different thing in different sciences, but it exists. So some of these things could be used as linkages in terms of creating that relational database. So database is going to be accessible in 3 different formats: spreadsheet, the SQL very light kind of version we have, and then eventually, as I said, which is a R-based dynamic visualizing tool. And in case you looking at this presentation, if any of you have any other ideas, we are very happy to receive those, even critique in terms of identifying what else can be done in order to make this open database more open. So what do we, as I said, we have been doing a lot. So we have been talking about actually what PCSing has been doing. So you can easily go, it's right there, the DOI is right there. If you can click a picture, it's openly accessible at our website, which is also newly done. It is like a go-to place. So go ahead and do explore. If you have any feedback or anything, there is also provision to do that. So we have been once again writing about the project. We have been presenting poster. This is INQUA. Once again, as I said, INQUA meets every 4 years. So in 2023 it met in Rome. So we, PCSing team did go to Rome. We did have a very dedicated workshop in terms of how to plan ahead in general. So what I have just shown you, it basically is a product of that workshop which happened in last July. Then we definitely go to conferences, talk to people in order to exchange ideas, and we also get invited to workshops like this. So thank you once again, so that we can interact with more and more archaeologists and get to learn. So when it comes to actual, identifying what are different opportunities and challenges, we do have one important thing which was a key objective, which is like the interdisciplinary collaborations they have emerged out of it. So people have started, they have been thinking about it, but they don't know that they didn't have a tool basically. So there is a person in Chile who is a coordinator and I'm sitting in India. At that point I was sitting elsewhere, but we could interact, we bonded just over this. Oh, you know what, I was thinking about it, you were thinking about it. So these, international collaborations, they emerge from these regions. Once again, it is very important to build those communities associated. So some of these challenges, as you could already see, lower number of records for many regions or certain regions. Certain regions are suffering a lot, such as Africa. So what we can do, can we make up, because Africa has such a rich archaeological, treasure trove. So can we just sort of start building from them? Can we just focus on one of the things first and then move to the next? Something like that. So each sub-region could have a different strategy. We decided not to go ahead with any published data sets at the moment because that creates another problem. So we will be demoing those, but at some later time, right? Then there is a discordant nature, disparate nature of records. So this is one of the challenges. So we have been brainstorming about it. We just had a very dedicated 3-day workshop, as I said earlier, in the end of January. And we have been thinking about how we can deal with these two. And last one as well also is very important. Spatial mismatches are always there, this disparate nature, as I said. But the temporal mismatches, which is also important, there are certain regions which are very biased towards Pleistocene and they don't have that many Holocene records. But then we have more action in terms of human beings in the Holocene. So what should we do, right? Both traceable, tangible things. So we are thinking once again, we said the focus for perhaps for the version 1 of the database could be Holocene. Then we can backtrack, and there are fantastic projects coming in also funded by INCO, and one of them is by Akhilesh sir. So that is going to focus on the Pleistocene aspects of, perhaps if I am not mistaken, India at the moment, is it?
Yeah. The project is called Value. Again, we are working with scientists who are working in Africa, Europe, and India, and that will be focusing more on the Acheulean only, lower Paleolithic, and a little bit of Old World as well. But we are not looking at the middle or upper Paleolithic, but we are starting with the Acheulean as of today.
Okay.
And other one which is also very important is the mapping ancient Africa, and then we will be able to get hold of some of the data and then lots of interaction and ultimately maybe
exactly, yeah. So I think we all trying to do our parts. Yeah. Sorry, I had to cut you. But thanks for a break. I needed that. So the thing is that we all try to do our parts, and it can only happen bit by bit. So I think that is also coming in. So keep your eyes and ears open. So with all that, it looks fascinating and it will come. All sounds great, all sounds good. But why should one care about database, which you have heard a lot? I am not going to harp you on that. But what about a multi-thing one? So why should we care? So I am going to quickly show you one example from my postdoctoral work. I am going to show you how different things interact with each other and what we can make of it. To give you a very quick thing as we are running out of time. So that project basically talked about agroforestry systems. So how agroforestry systems came to be. So if some of you might not know, this region is very well acquainted with agroforestry if I am not mistaken. That what you basically do is you basically cultivate crops either under or alongside the trees. So this is technically agro and forestry together, right? Agriculture and forestry. So these landscapes, they exist in India, they exist in all parts of the globe. And what they often are complemented with in India, some other countries as well, is the sacred forest groves. So does everybody know what a sacred forest grove is? If the name enters, basically it's a community driven, once again, a community's way to preserve one patch of a forest or a bit bigger patch of a forest or recreate a forest. So all that in whatever I have been thinking and reading and whatnot, I realize that is very global in the context. So we do see these systems all over, and especially agroforestry is seen in the context of mitigating climate change more easily while feeding people. So agroforestry, what it can do is can increase the forest cover, but at the same time what it can do, it can basically give livelihood to people who are living around, right? So that is where the agroforestry is seen. So with that, actually India really has a bold plan to increase agroforestry cover by so and so date as such. So we do have a national agroforestry policy in place. So when I try to look at this, when it comes to agroforestry, it's agriculture and forestry together. And we can see that there are two important actors who can implement this policy. One is farmers and second one is foresters, right? Because it's agroforestry. And when I started looking at their landscape management, what I saw is the conflict. And where is that conflict? And I'm coming back to the increasing fire risk here. So can you describe quickly in one word what am I talking about here? I'm talking about farmers and foresters and having certain way they interact with land or talk about the land or work with the landscape. And they try to do one thing but in exactly opposite way. So that thing is fire. So when it comes to agriculturalists, what they do is in every crop cycle or in some of the crop cycle or alternate years, they try to burn the land in such a way that it becomes, reproducible again. Foresters on the other hand, they don't like it at all. So there are certain practices basically which go back in time. Once again, it does have a colonial root to an extent. And we can imagine that there are conflicts in this. So I saw this as a very interesting problem, that we have a very important policy which can actually positively, make something in terms of climate mitigation. We have agroforestry in place, we have these systems which is global in the context. So what we can make of it? So for that, what I try to look at as my postdoctoral Medicuri project is the Western Ghats. Is everybody aware where Western Ghats are? I don't have to go into that, which is right there, west coast of India. One of the tremendously amazing landscapes, such as Northeast we have here. We do have a biodiversity hotspot there. And that biodiversity hotspot is not any biodiversity hotspot, it's that biodiversity hotspot which supports the highest population in the world. So can we look at that agroforestry system which exists on the Western Ghats, which is a biodiversity hotspot. It is agroforestry which can basically balance between climate mitigation and livelihood support. And on top of it, can we then look at what it does in terms of the policy as such. So looking at this landscape, which is, as I said, very spectacular, by the way, we can just move to the next one. So what I tried to do is basically try to examine it is from the long-term transformation. And why I brought it here? Because it does have all these three themes, the paleoecology, paleoclimatology and archaeology as well. Because we are looking in the past, we are looking at how people have been doing what they have been doing. So idea, the end product was to basically come up with those scenarios with which the policy makers can work. So it is important for scientists to speak with other communities as well in order to make sure that those communities can learn and we can learn from them as well. So when it comes to the policies, many of our scientific discoveries do not matter because they are not at the right scale for them to implement those policies or even plan those policies. So I just thought in a much smaller timeline, can I get that? Yes, there is a paleoclimatic data, paleoecological data and even archaeological data to an extent can help building policies. So you can see the importance of archaeological data. So that's why I think I'll keep coming back to that, but feeling that template with conviction is extremely important because one day it can get utilized in those things which are going to be important for that region's future as well. So as we go, what I try to look at is, as I said, paleoclimatology, which is right there, different mechanisms to do that, paleoecology, the forest and humans, how they interact with each other over time. Fire once have been a very important part of it, which also came from sediments coming at the same time from archaeological records to an extent. So when I try to put it together, the past for the future approach, as I said earlier, paleoecology for ecological management, what I got is all these series of graphs. I'm not going to go over it, but I'm going to just quickly tell you where is what. So if you can quickly say that there is a canopy cover right there and you can do all sorts of statistical analysis and you can make it look very beautiful and whatnot. We are not into that. What I want you to see here, a case study where paleoecological data sets are interacting with climatological data sets, which basically are telling us that climate over the last 4,000 years is going drier and drier. So we are going towards higher and higher risk of fires which are getting spread into the forest, which is a problem for the foresters. That's why they tell you not to do that at all. So then what that means is somewhere in the middle ground we have to find it. But where to find it? This ecological data or empirical data can help you. So that is where the paleoecology is, that is where canopy cover or tree cover we can see. That is where how climate is doing, what climate is doing we can see. And this panel which you won't be able to see that clearly, but that basically is reconstructed from the archaeological data sets from that region. And this is the central part of Western Ghats I'm talking about. So essentially the Kodagu region, I don't know whether you have visited, but it does have a very rich history reported. I mean every region has a rich history but not all of it is reported. Here in this case it is reported in a way that I could reconstruct what people have been doing, how they have been using that land. So was it local, was it regional, at what point it became regional and at what point they were still local and what not. So going all the way from the Neolithic to the British era, I could actually reconstruct what was happening in that landscape. So this is the power of putting databases together where many of these different indicators can interact. So I think that with that, once again, I wouldn't go into details. If we have time, we could. What I wanted to say that we look at the bigger picture, we should. So what we do is we try to create these databases, we answer certain questions, and those certain questions need to be, they need to be looked at from a multi-dimensional point of view. So here in this case, I want to highlight that archaeology, basically what we do, we look at how people have been doing, what are their people's stories, and those stories also have negative and the positive stories. So many of the times we get into very apocalyptic or collaptic mode, and we say that oh, bad was happening and no good was happening, but that's not the case. You have seen all different things people have produced, those are beautiful things. So can we highlight that people have been interacting and people have been living here for a while, so they have been part of the landscape and what that landscape then means. So that becomes very important implication for the policy. So policies are not looked at only one way, but the other way around as well, it has to be people centric. So if we go and then just try to give you, as I said, a very quick last slide for the piecing. So these are, so that question which really interested me, that's what I took up for my fellowship, postdoctoral fellowship, and I went ahead and I addressed it. So this is exactly what PCC is going to do. So PCC is going to address the community research questions. I would like to thank you all, and thanks NMMA and ASI for inviting me.
Thank you.